Okay, we begin, though, with our big story here. This growing legal battle over that controversial immigration law in Texas. Attorneys for the state today fighting to lift a hold on the measure after a federal appeals court blocked it again. That decision coming down late last night in response to the ruling from the Supreme Court. Now, the law would allow state and local law enforcement officers to arrest people that they suspect have crossed the border illegally, and not just near the border, but anywhere in Texas. Now, Republican Governor Greg Abbott says that it's needed to address the influx of migrants there, but the Biden administration is fighting to have it struck down, calling it a violation of federal authority. And critics say it would lead to widespread racial profiling. So joining us for more on this is our ABC News senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry, thank you so much for being here with us. And let's jump right into this, right? This Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is a three-judge panel, right? So are any of these judges at this point expressing any sympathy to the arguments being made by Texas?
Well, it looks like it, Ken. It looks like it would be a split decision based on what they were doing during the course of this argument. Two of the justices were judges were very active. One is very skeptical of the Texas law. This judge, the chief judge of that panel, said that she thought that this law fell afoul of the constitutional structure and, more importantly, of a Supreme Court precedent that's not even a dozen years old at this point, where the Supreme Court said that the federal government has full authority over immigration, no room for the states to make their own laws. That's to keep the entire system running in the same way and equitably. There was another judge, used to be the general counsel to Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He was really skeptical of the Justice Department's position. And the third judge, she's a Biden appointee, she remained silent. So if you were a betting person, you'd say that it looks like this panel will uphold what they were looking at, which was an injunction. In other words, they will not let this law go into effect at this point.
So if that's what you think right now, potentially they will not let the whole law go into effect. Terry, is it at all possible that, parts of this law would go into effect?
It is. Courts can certainly do that. They don't have to take the law entirely up or entirely down. If some of the provisions of the law look as if they would pass constitutional muster, that would be okay. But this is a lower court. It's one of the top courts in the country, but it's just below the Supreme Court. And there is that 2012 case of Arizona versus the United States, when Arizona tried to get its own law enforcement involved in enforcing immigration under its laws. And the Supreme Court in that case said there isn't any room. The federal government occupies the entire field of immigration law, is the way the court put it back then. So it's unlikely that this lower court, the Fifth Circuit, would uphold some of the law. But it's quite possible that when it gets to the Supreme Court, that could happen.
Well, and so that leads me right to my next question there, Terry. I mean, you've called it constitutional collision, right? I mean, so do you anticipate this just sort of going right back to the Supreme Court?
There's no doubt that this will get to the Supreme Court because it is such a bold move by Texas. And when it gets there, the Supreme Court, not just the conservative justices, will take note of the fact that the federal government, which has full authority under that old case, is failing on the border, and that Texas, as a sovereign state, is trying, under its own powers, to do something about an immigration situation that is overwhelming some of its communities. They'll notice that. Whether or not that changes the result at the end of the day, it's hard to say. But this is a tough situation for the Justice Department to defend its position, given the fact that the Department of Justice and the rest of the federal government, not just under President Biden, but under several presidents, has failed, and the states are desperate.
Absolutely. All right, Terry Moran, thank you so much for your coverage and your analysis of all of that. We always really appreciate that. I want to bring our big story now to our panel. So joining us for more on this today is our ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse, our former Republican congressman from New York, John Katko, our Democratic strategist and president of Next Gen America, Christina Sinsoon Ramirez, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, LZ Granderson. So thank you all for being here with us. And LZ, look, I know you've been down to Eagle Pass and El Paso during the migrant crisis. Can you just share with us what you have observed?
Sure, Kana. Well, first of all, I live in Texas, and so it's also important to know that just as a resident of the state, I have seen the influx of migrants throughout the county that I live in, and throughout San Antonio, the city that I live in. We processed more than 100,000 over the last 4 years through San Antonio. So we've seen a lot of it down here. And what I can tell you is that nearly 10% of the Texas workforce is undocumented workers. Undocumented workforce, nearly 10%. So, let's talk about the constitutionality of it all if you want to, but just from a practical standpoint, do you have any idea what that would do to our economy if the police started harassing workers on their way to work, or worse yet, pulling over people who were undocumented, didn't commit any crimes, but find themselves in the court system, and now our economic system is being ground to a halt. So I think there's mean-spirited. I have not talked to anyone in any of my reporting who supports this law, and I just think that it's misguided.
Mean-spirited and misguided. Look, Christina, I know that you're also in Texas, right, too? You're in Texas?
I live in Austin.
Yes. Okay, so you're there in Texas as well. I know that you also share some of the similar ideas that LZ has, that, some of these people are a huge part of the workforce there. But so, Christina, what is your response here from lawmakers that say, look, SB 4 effectively mirrors the federal law?
It actually does nothing to mirror the federal law, and it really upends not just on this issue, but the role of the federal government. It is very far-reaching. It would supersede asylum processes. I'm going to give an example of just how dangerous this law is. You have to remember that in Texas, 1 in 6 Texans are foreign-born. Majority of our population are people of color. It expands racial profiling and makes people who are often victims of violent crimes afraid to come forward. Years ago, when I worked with immigrants across Texas, there was a 13-year-old girl that was raped. Her parents were undocumented. At that time, immigration enforcement and police had started to work together. They waited an entire week to report that crime because they were afraid if they went to the police, they could be deported. Those are the kinds of things that will happen. And that's why you have the sheriff of El Paso saying, we don't want to implement this law. It will not make our community safer. It will distract us from doing the good work we have to do to make communities safe against violent crimes. So, and the last thing to say is you even have the Mexican government saying you're going to be deporting people that aren't even Mexican citizens to Mexico. It is completely flawed in how it was constructed against the U.S. Constitution, its resources, and criminal justice.
And John, what's your response to all of this right now? We know that last year, U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions of migrants at the southern border hit historic levels, noting they have since declined a bit. But John, Texas Governor Abbott says the current Biden administration border policies are endangering the safety of Americans. What is your response?
Well, I don't disagree with that, and I credit what LZ and Christina were saying about the human element of this. But there's a right way to come into the country, and there's a wrong way to come into the country. And just walking across the border and wanting to get what you want because you're in a desperate situation, I feel for those people. But there's a right way to do it, and quite frankly, all parties have failed. And what Terry said earlier is absolutely right. There's an air of desperation in these states. That's why they're doing these things. I don't necessarily believe that it's within a purview of the states to do it, but they're desperate. And it's undeniable that on the first day that President Biden was in office, he signaled to the cartels who control the border that it's a different type of enforcement mechanism. It's going to be softer. And that's why you have this big surge. So the bottom line is we need immigration reform. We need to secure the border. We need to have people coming into this country the right way.
Certainly. And Mike, what is your response to all of this? I mean, a lot of people are now looking at President Biden. They're commenting on his failed policies. They're hurting him at the polls right now, and they're saying, why not take executive action and do something at the border?
This is a really good conversation that we're having, Kana. I think from a 30,000-foot perspective, we have to look at our governance and how we govern in Congress. Congress can no longer govern the way that it used to, where it could take 2, 3, 5 years to debate over an issue before they determine whether or not what policies should be brought to the floor for legislation. We're in such a crisis right now that Congress needs to speed up their level of debate and also to the speed to which they bring bills to the floor to have objective debate in order to get to the best policy and legislation there is possible. These states are in a desperate situation, but their desperation on the states is not matching the level of urgency in Congress. President Biden has issued certain executive orders, but there's only so much he can do within his purview that any president can do in their purview that needs to take a look at Congress to have a comprehensive plan. If not, Kana, we're going to have a patchwork of states that operate differently that will cause even more confusion within our system system. And Kana, we're not even talking about what's happening from the north of the border. We're not talking about people who fly into the country and overstay their visas. We're not talking about people who marry in a microeconomy for permanent citizenship through marriage. There's so much brokenness within our immigration system that we need more of a comprehensive overhaul, and Congress needs to act and do better governance.
Certainly. All right, Mike, John, Christina, and LZ, our thanks to... Yeah. Go ahead, LZ.
It has to be said. Congress had a comprehensive bipartisan bill that was killed by the GOP leading nominee, Donald Trump. So Mike is absolutely correct. Congress does need to work, and they did work, and they had a bipartisan bill ready to be voted on in the House, and Mike Johnson did not want to upset Donald Trump.
LZ, you're exactly right, and half a loaf is better than none, and they should have taken what they got.
And soft diplomacy.
You've talked about that, right?
Yeah.
You guys have talked a lot about that idea here of the Reagan policy, right, of take what you can get now and ask for more later.
Exactly.
But again, they said it just didn't go far enough. So here we are. It's still a battle. All right, Mike, John, Christina, and LZ, our thanks to all of you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.